The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com.
Hey, welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. Before we jump into this groundbreaking episode with our three Grand Chaplains, just want to give a quick thank you to Dwight Lewis. He's become the latest $5 Patreon subscriber for the Craftsman Online Podcast. Thank you so much, Dwight. We appreciate your support. We hook you up with ad-free episodes plus access to all of our subscriber extra episodes. That's a pretty big back catalog, including this week's guest. You can get the free 7-day trial right now. Just open up the notes for this episode in the description. Bang, you'll find the link to get started with Craftsman Online on Patreon. So this is pretty groundbreaking, and I love how progressive the Grand Lodge of New York is. We've got three Right Worshipful Brothers. We're welcoming on Right Worshipful Brother Kanjin Cederman, Fahimul Islam, and Yatri Trivedi. They are the first Buddhist, Muslim, and Hindu Grand Chaplains for the Grand Lodge of New York. In this inspiring episode, we're going to be getting into their unique journeys into Freemasonry. We'll discuss the significance of their groundbreaking appointments by our Grand Master, Most Worshipful Brother Stephen Adam Rubin, and how their diverse spiritual paths connect not only with each other, but with brothers in the craft, and how they enhance the timeless principles that we learn in Freemasonry.
My brothers, before we jump in, would it be okay with three chaplains on, if we may start with bringing a little spirituality into the mix?
Perfect. Go for it.
In the name of the Grand Architect, the most beneficent, the most compassionate, Architect of the universe, the Grand, the forgiving, Master of the Day of Judgment, Thee we worship, and from Thee we seek help. Guide us upon the path of light, not upon the path of those who go astray or incur your wrath. Amen.
So motivating.
I wish I could start every episode with a verbal prayer. Usually I say a small silent one for myself, but no, that was really special. Thank you, Right Worshipful. Who wants to jump on the personal background? What brought you into Freemasonry?
My parents had emigrated at a time where there wasn't a ton of people of my faith around. And my family had congregated outside of Philadelphia. And so every time we had religious or family events, we rented a hall, and happened to be a Masonic hall. And that was my first sort of introduction to that. So I started looking into what that was when I was younger. You hear a lot of things and you shouldn't believe them all, but not having met anybody, I couldn't ask questions. And then you fast forward to, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I was living in New York, and I had a group of friends through Reddit, the New York Reddit meetup, and just having discussions, and Masonry came up, and I was like, hey, I wish I knew more about it, but the only familiarity I have is from the halls. And someone just said, hey, well, what do you want to know? And that was sort of what got the ball rolling.
Yatri, can you tell us a little bit about your faith background? I can see you on camera, and our YouTube live streamers can see you as well, but for our podcast listeners.
I come from a Hindu background. I'm Gujarati. Culturally, India is very, very diverse. So where you're from, what region you're from really matters a lot. I was very grateful growing up with my grandparents. My paternal grandparents lived with us at home. And that's sort of, how I got started on the path, because I would ask questions and I got some answers. I had an interest in the practicality of things. I started studying Sanskrit on my own when I was 14, 15, 16. I went to Rutgers. I have a BA in religion. I was originally hoping to go into academia. I actually did a short post back at Columbia too. I find so many actually interesting parallels between the tech world and my religious background. Frameworks, There's just a lot of thinking in the abstract in both places. I got married 9 years ago, and I had a great family pundit that answered all my questions, and I learned a lot. And my cousin was getting ready to, propose, and he asked, would you do the big Indian wedding again? I said, absolutely. So he started asking questions. I started explaining them, and he said, you should be doing this work. And I kind of laughed. I thought it was a joke. He wasn't laughing. I realized for the first time in my life it was a real calling.
Fa, why don't you help us out? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your faith, your background, and what drew you to becoming a Freemason.
My spirituality and my Masonic life, are the two things really any different? When you put the two circles together, there's very little that's outside that Venn. My cultural background, my family's from Bangladesh. I practiced the Islamic faith about 4 generations ago. Yatri, my family in Bangladesh was actually 5 generations ago, were practicing Hinduism. And then Islam came through, and my mother had me going to the mosque or the masjid that was around the corner for all my life on Fridays for service, because Muslims go to service on Fridays. It was in a different language. I couldn't wait to get out. We go through these motions that I had no idea. Not only did I not know what we were doing, the message wasn't being heard. Spirituality-wise, I drank from the fountain of Freemasonry first, before I drank from the fountain of Islam, though I was born into Islam. It wasn't until my early to mid-30s that I dug into the testaments and then the Quran and started learning about the stories of the prophets and just putting those pieces together, the framework of that monotheistic archetype of religion, if you will, right? That the majority of human beings today adhere to that Abrahamic concept. Before that, it was just a system of right and wrong, right? So in my early 20s, I got to Masonry when I was about 21 years old. And for the first time, that God, we actually talked about it in a meaningful way for me. In a world where this beautiful religion of mine, this beautiful spiritual aspect that I ascribe to, is being perverted into such horrible things, and in a world where it's so easy to be drinking from the wrong fountain of Islam, I love the fact that it was Masonry that was my balance to it. It allowed me to take those same principles and take the softer, sweeter path. It allowed me to take those same ideals and execute them into real world based on the principles of Masonry, which is how do I make myself better in order to make the world around me better. It's not about me. I'm not the center of the universe. The universe is, love is the center of the universe. My point of existence every day is to figure out how can I add to that love more than I take from it, right? That's, that's the most important thing that I think affects my journey into this. It's a wonderful dance to be dancing in this role,
All right, Kanjin, take us home. Tell us about you.
Well, I like how Fa was saying about drinking from the fountain of Masonry, and what he was saying was actually made me think a lot. That actually, perhaps my first, I met Masonry before I even met my spiritual path as well. Since I was a child, my family have been many generations in the Masons, and so I was actually raised in a lot of these lodges. And had an interesting affinity. I knew from a very young age that I was very interested in Masonry, and it connected me with my father and my grandfather, etc. So it wasn't something I wanted. I decided because my father had the requirement that I didn't have any debt besides school debt for me to become a Mason. That was a kind of requirement, I guess, from my family. And that he had to consider me a man responsible enough to become a Mason. So I believe I became a Mason when I was 20. I started my path in the spiritual. I knew I was a Buddhist perhaps from 9 years old when I thought I created my own spiritual path, because I thought, everyone has the same capacity. So I don't need to rely on others. I can figure out it for myself. And it's just as relevant as other people. And then when I went to Japan when I was 14, by myself, I met a Buddhist monk, and that's when I realized the two correlated, and that's how I began my Buddhist journey, and then became a Buddhist monk, age of 17, and priest at the age of 21. So therefore, I've been doing that since. My day position is actually I work for the government. I'm now a chaplain, a Buddhist chaplain with the U.S. Navy. And also I work in a hospital as a chaplain. And through my Masonic journey, my spirituality and Masonry have kind of pretty much grown together because I originally wanted to become a Mason because to understand what it meant to be an American or living in the United States, since we don't perceive to have any traditions. The only tradition I could see that existed was Masonry, something that was continued, especially in my family, which made it all the more important for me to connect to that. So I agree that perhaps the first fountain that I drank from was that of Masonry, and that, of course, Masonry had directed me in spiritual practice as well.
One of the things that was unique in all of your answers was that Freemasonry kind of helped me find my spiritual path, or lit my spiritual path for me to take those steps, which is interesting because that's kind of been the whole intent. The whole idea of Freemasonry is to build that foundation to have the connection to deity, to the supreme architect of the universe.
I think the other thing that the three of us, and in fact, all of us on this call, have in common is a similar age demographic. And that's important because I feel like we're the gatekeepers between the new and old, right? Like I walked into libraries and used library cards and encyclopedias. I also did the whole running home online and logging on to AOL and right? And so I'm familiar with the new and old, and I see folks like my nephews, right? I've got a 25-year-old nephew, I've got a 21-year-old nephew, I've got a 16-year-old nephew. I see the amount of information that's at their disposal versus what was coming our way. They have to work just as hard now to fight misinformation as they do good information. And I say that because there's just, life is going at a different pace than it did when I was growing up, it feels like. And the reason why that's important is because to incorporate religion, there's the spirituality, and then there's the dogma of it, the dogmatic everyday piece, right? And then there's the time it takes to actually learn, implement, and live these ideals. And whether it's Freemasonry or any of these other religions, I think the Freemasonry part is important because it acts as a wonderful placeholder, right? If you haven't gotten it all figured out yet, that's okay. Just ascribe to the grand architect. Know that your fellow man also has a right to have his own understanding of how the laws of the universe works, right? All we just want you to do is to know that there is a spirit of the universe, and use that as a placeholder until you figure out what your relationship is with that spirit and, what your purpose is from that spirit. Until then, your brother's got you, and, stick to the degrees. They won't guide you wrong.
I have a slightly different experience because you guys both came in your 20s, early 20s.
I was 21 years old.
And Brother Kanjin, you said as well?
I believe it was 21.
I didn't come in until I was 33-ish. When I was a kid, my grandmother taught me meditation. So that was my tool. And my way of perceiving the divine was all through primary experience via meditation. And not that I didn't have faith, not that I didn't say prayers, but those were things I did to revere the awe that I felt. I think for me, Masonry taught me that ritual is very, very powerful. Because having become an entered apprentice and going through the memorization work there, I started to realize I see the connections that are in place. Like Hinduism also is somewhat different, I think, because just like Masonry, it kind of gives you everything. It throws all different paths at you and lets you, find something that interests you and run with it.
The first time I walked into a lodge and I was like, whoa, I thought you guys said that this wasn't a religion, but there's an altar. And being a New York Mason, there were like 3 volumes of sacred text on my mother lodge's altar. I'm like, there's the biggest Bible I've ever seen in my life. And these 2 other books that I can't read what's on them because it's in a different language, but I'm guessing that it's some, sacred text of some sort, like something important. And I'll paraphrase it because it's a part of New York ritual that I love so much in the first degree, where you're at the Bible or you're at the altar and the master says that book you put your hands on, inside of it is all this. And we all agree that no matter what faith you come from, no matter what branch you come from, that all good men agree on these important principles that can be found within this book, right? Then there's another part specifically that like kind of tapped me on the forehead and was like, wake up. And it's the part where he, again, I'll kind of paraphrase, says like, becoming a Freemason, you are going to have your belief and acceptance challenged. And not in a way that's going to challenge you, like shake you to the core, like, oh my gosh, I question my belief in existence, but I'm going to open my mind to other things that are out there. So I'll toss this out to you, to the three of you, and I'm just curious what exploration you have done or what perspective have opened through your eyes now going through this Masonic experience by the help and the aid of your other brothers.
I was taught that Masonry is a place where people are safe to meet of any background, of any mankind under the specific, standard that we have, which makes it into a safe place. And that's how it was preserved through my family, that this was the only place where before, now we think about how easy it is for religions and people from different cultural backgrounds to get together and to meet. That was not always the case. And Masonry in a lot of tradition is seen as that place where we are able to meet. And also, as we were talking about spirituality, to grow. Although I grew up in the mostly Christian area, Christianity to me was actually something that was quite, had a bad, feeling toward, and also a kind of dislike, according to this association from the people that I had met that reported themselves to be Christian. And even I would say even trauma in that case. But in coming to the Masonic Lodge was the only place that I actually, before, as Paul was saying, before internet and all of that, having a place in which you met people who were practicing of different faiths. And even amongst different faiths, we may lump Christianity or Islam all together, but there are many different schools of thought, different beliefs, different cultural elements, etc. And that through that, I was able to distinguish perhaps what we strive for in our Buddhism, the idea of the authentic self, or that how we are able to spiritually navigate with others. Because in society, usually, as you see, most of the time, those things are taboo. But yet, we have a respectful aspect of it, kind of ground rules or our base, but yet we acknowledge it, which I don't know if in society people would acknowledge it because of all the difficulties that come with it, and perhaps even judgments, because people also don't realize now, if you said you were a particular religion, people would judge you. Hence, people changed their last names so that they didn't sound specifically of different traditions, etc. They hid their religion. But that actually, I was taught that Masonry was the only place in which those different faiths and teachings could actually meet peacefully within our society. Now it may not seem so relevant, but actually I believe it is still relevant because I have brothers from many backgrounds, and even knowing people and being within the community with them has even softened them. And this is the amazing part of Masonry, even though we're so old, the ability of Masons to change, which I think is one of the greatest characteristics of man, is that the ability to change. And that is a constant, but yet there are many people who constantly fight against that. And that is something, as we see even with the three of us coming into existence as Grand Chaplains, that shows the progression of Masonry. Because even though you may say, why in 2026 this hasn't happened before, in most of society, it still hasn't happened.
Growing up in Jackson Heights, Queens, my best friends were Jewish, Christian. Some of my first girlfriends were Christian. I ended up going to Christmas Mass and Easter, and just I got a good amount of exposure coming into this role, I look at it as two main charges. Help brethren with their day-to-day. A brother in my lodge has done a few lectures on the mental health crisis that men are going through today, the crisis of loneliness and the mental health crisis that generally exists in the population. I talked about being the gatekeepers of information and how information overload is happening. More and more is being put in that I think is of lesser and lesser quality. So it's our jobs first to make sure we have a clear channel between us and the spirit of the sun. And then to be able to put that into, to borrow that line from the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, but then to be able to be channels of peace and bring that to our brothers. That's my first job, right? When I get those notices about brothers passing away, or when I find out that there's a brother who's struggling with things or their family member, to reach out and add that personal touch. That's needed. That's absolutely needed. And that's not just a job of a chaplain, right? That's every brother's job. Second, going back to us being the sixth oldest Grand Lodge, going back to the fact that we are builders of men. First, we build ourselves, but not so that we can just sit there, right? We build ourselves so that we can be useful to the society around us. And I am particularly blessed to be an American Muslim Mason at a time when we're going through what we go through. Like I mentioned, growing up in Queens and Jackson Heights, which is predominantly now Muslim, a good Buddhist population, a good amount of Buddhist population there as well. There's always been a Hindu minority there, and that's also growing. And of course, Jackson Heights was founded first German, then Irish, then Italian culture. So those faiths are inherently interwoven. Christianity is inherently interwoven in that. But more and more people who look like me and Yatri are there. So I say that now I live in Westchester County, and I think they say Westchester County is probably one of the biggest concentration or majority Jewish population, right? Like outside of Israel. And we know what the world's been going through the last 2 years. It's that much more important for me in this role to be aware of the sensitivities of that particular religion and be a channel, a bridge between those things. So like, for example, when Brother Barayal came into this role, it was amazing because I got to pick his brain and we did a couple of prayer together at the dedication breakfast that we do. And it was very, very well received. Just a reflection of the fact that the general population of Masonry is looking for that, is looking for examples of unity. And that it's coming from Freemasonry, I think fills my heart with extra joy.
It's sort of the understanding of how do we talk about this, right? So as an example, in the podcast, you won't necessarily see it, right? But I have a forehead marking that I'm wearing right now. It's white ash from my personal practice. It's interesting because I meet people, and I only started wearing that, a handful of years ago. People see it, they notice it, but they are often hesitant to ask about it. But brothers tend to be a little inquisitive. They do push a little bit, and they'll give you all of the verbal scaffolding, right? I may not know the right term. I'm sorry if I offend you, but they will ask. And when we talk about it, they come away knowing a little bit more, but they also come away seeing that it's not so strange compared to what they might be used to.
Every time Yatri goes into a temple with that square and compass on, there's a new group of people who are going to be asking about that square and compass that they otherwise, I was recently in Texas, went down to this big Islamic center in DeSoto. And everywhere I go, I always make sure that I, talk about the fact that I'm a Freemason and my particular role. And I often tap into the lodge or the Grand Lodge that's in the jurisdiction I'm going to. And so I get to know some folks there. And I try to build some bridges because Masonry, no matter where we go, can always use new interest, new members, new life. And at the same time, I describe it to the guys in the various mosques, and I go to, like, even the guys in Utica, where our Masonic campuses, the couple mosques that I went to, they're literally 10 minutes apart from each other. And this will be the first year during Ramadan where we get invited, and the brothers from Grand Lodge will hopefully be able to go over to that central mosque in Utica and break some bread together. And so what I described to the brothers in the mosque or any other place outside of Masonry, I say, you can go to a business and plug into what that business serves, that one or two things that they sell or serve. And you can go to a mosque or a temple and plug into that spirituality. When you go to the wall of Freemasonry, there's a cajillion things you can plug into. And so, everyone at Kanjin's temple should feel comfortable to come and plug into that wall of Freemasonry. And everyone at Yatri's temple and everyone at my mosque should be able to, and they haven't been. And we as Masons need that. And certainly our guys should be able to tap into that greater network.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying, because actually, my temple is in my home lodge. We rent one of the rooms, actually. We've had the temple here for almost about 2.5 years. So when people come to the temple, they see that it's in a Masonic lodge. So that gives them a few different doors that they have to, or barriers they have to overcome. But that just goes again to show, and I'd like to just point out that the role of chaplain, how significant it is, because I don't think it's been utilized as much as with this Grandmaster Reuben, in the sense that he made this big effort, because I'm sure this is not without its detractors and questioning, etc., of the people who don't know, though I haven't seen that or experienced it. But I think it's really important that the role of the chaplain hasn't been pushed to the side, because a lot of times, like if you look at the lodge, would you like to be chaplain? How about you? Right. And that it didn't really actually serve a purpose. But I like to remind people that in the military, there's only 3 people that can speak to the chief officer. One of them is directly, without going through the chain of command. One of them is the chaplain. Therefore, that is possessed a lot of responsibility. And that, as Fa was saying, to check in about the wellness of our brothers, and that each of us, that we serve as an example, and that each of us as Masons, as Freemasons, do the same, and that we are the example, that we send cards to brothers, but not only that, calling and caring, and as was stated about, for instance, the inquisitive nature of brothers about certain things, I find that to be, as we were talking about before, a safe place, that they don't have to feel like they're ignorant. They can go ahead and ask those questions without fear, and that they actually get the opportunity, because as diverse as this world thinks it is still very secluded in many ways. And people, the more you get out from the cities, the more insular people are. And they don't have the opportunity to meet somebody of a different faith. We take that for granted if you've ever lived in a big city, right? Or if you've actually had the opportunity to travel. Those are still very, as mind-blowing as it is, that is still very much a luxury. And that we, as chaplains, should be able to bring back or share that information with our brothers, making them stronger. Because even we talk about how much information there is out, and Fa talked about the quality of information. Firsthand information is the best, because again, you can't believe everything you find on the internet. It doesn't mean it's true. And I think that allows us a certain level of intelligence and, benefit in our diversity. And as our diversity grows and our lodges grow, I think that is the best place for us to grow as human beings.
I was at the Grand Launch session in May. I knew that Kanjin had already been appointed with his commission to write Worshipful, because I got that information literally like days before we recorded your podcast episode in 2025, early 2025 here for Craftsman Online. But when I heard that Yatri and Fa had also been appointed, I was like, yes, it's about time that we've done these things, right? And that's what I love about our Grand Master. So I want to put the question back on you, because you've talked about this need to expand, get back to the roots, redefine this role. You are 3 Grand Chaplains with that purple apron, with the right worshipful title, with the ability to make transformative change. What are some things that you're looking at doing during your time in serving the Grand Lodge? What is some light that you want to be bringing to our craft?
Thank you for shouting out the current Grand Master. I think it's worth saying that I feel an extreme amount of gratitude for Most Worshipful Kessler for getting the ball started with this particular piece with Grandmaster Rubin when he appointed me a few years ago, and then continuing on with getting the diversity since Grandmaster Rubin's taken the helm with what he's done. I think it's amazing. I also want to say a big shout out to Right Worshipful Stenrick Adams, our unofficial captain of the chaplains. He's been an amazing guiding light. And Kanjin, you mentioned the fact that a chaplain still has the ability to go to the top of the house, the top of command, without any barriers. People who lead are supposed to be able to get guidance to lead within the framework of what the Grand Architect wants us to do. And we human beings, right, we're inherently flawed according to, my lay of the land. We're inherently flawed in that we're not going to remember every tool that's in our tool belt every single day. In my walk of life, I'm taught to go and pray 5 times a day, at least to check in with God multiple times and to remember the principles I need as the problems are coming up on a day-to-day basis, because I can't remember everything at once. So then going back to this question of what we're doing, I think the chaplain role exists because we still have to not just deliver that wellness, but that message to our brethren on a daily basis and to our leadership when tough decisions have to be made. I think that we as a Grand Lodge need to really, really focus on the wellness aspect. I know there's a couple of brothers like Right Worshipful Weisberg, another chaplain up in northern New York. Our goal is to, and I think Yatri, you mentioned you're excited about this as well, is to kick off some kind of program where brothers who are in recovery are able to get together and talk about their recovery experience and how it works with their Masonic life and how they integrate the Masonic principles with their recovery principles, but not just for the ones that are in it, but for the ones that are struggling around us. Not one time do I mention to a brother that, for example, I don't drink, and it's not because of the Islamic faith. In the Islamic faith, you also don't drink, but it's because, in particular, I'm also in recovery, and I don't drink. There's always someone that they want me to reach out to, or a story of how someone needed help. I think Brother Weisberg mentioned last summer that just in the first 2 quarters, there were over a dozen brothers in upstate New York that reached out to him that they needed to help get into some kind of programs. That's a big goal of mine to start implementing.
Thanks again to our 3 Grand Chaplains, Right Worshipful Brothers Cederman, Islam, and Trivedi. We're going to get some bonus time with them on Thursday morning. If you are a Patreon subscriber, that episode, be on the lookout for it, as we continue our discussion on reimagining the role of the Lodge Chaplain. I love that. I'm Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Craftsman Online Podcast, look forward to seeing you next Monday with our guest, Brother Austin Schifrin, as we talk about his latest book, No Common Fire. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.